In the stillness of the night, when darkness shrouds the world in its soft cover, Rose Emmeline stirred restlessly in her bed. At that moment, out of nowhere, a mysterious voice called out to her by name. The voice, mysterious and elusive, like a ghost in the darkness, kept echoing in her head, keeping her awake. Eventually, his insistence crossed all bounds, pulling Rose from the embrace of sleep, causing her to jump out of bed, eyes wide open, looking for the source of the sound. Rosa, despite her humble life as a tutor teaching the children of wealthy families, could never have imagined that she would find herself in such a situation. Her life filled with books and classes turned into something unimaginable overnight. Falling asleep in her room, she could only dream of a quiet and peaceful night's rest, but the reality was quite different. Upon awakening, she found herself in a place that was completely unfamiliar to her, a world different from her usual haven. A sight appeared before Rose that made her heart sink with surprise and amazement. A naked man, his figure loomed in the semi-darkness like a sculpture created by an invisible sculptor from shadows and light. The man standing in front of Rose exuded a strange confidence, as if he had found the solution to her night's restlessness. As if it were a matter of course, he suggested that the nightmare was the cause of her sudden awakening. However, when addressing her, he used the name Agnes, which immediately provoked a reaction from Rose. With bewilderment and a touch of consternation, she hastened to correct the stranger, introducing herself by her real name. In response to her words, the man stood still for a moment, his gaze impenetrable, as if he were trying to unravel the mystery behind her words. But he preferred to remain silent. Rose, feeling his gaze on her, could not hide her embarrassment. She felt like an unwilling participant in some mysterious play, the scenario of which was completely unknown to her. Her gaze slid involuntarily over the man's figure, noting every detail of his appearance, which only added to her confusion. Unable to bear the tense atmosphere any longer, and feeling the growing discomfort of his nakedness, Rose gathered her courage and, trying to maintain her dignity in such an unusual situation, asked him to get dressed. The man, without losing his enigmatic confidence, tried to reassure Rosa by asserting that Agnes had no reason to be embarrassed. But his words only increased the growing tension between them, for Rose emphasized again and again that she was not what this stranger thought she was. In an effort to set boundaries and maintain personal space, she firmly asked him to stay away. The situation suddenly escalated when, while stepping back in response to a request, she accidentally stepped on the blanket. This awkward movement caused him to lose his balance. Rose, who was too close, tried to stand on her feet, but to no avail. She couldn't balance her body, and she fell right on top of the man, suddenly finding herself in his arms. The moment touched the most delicate strings of her soul, causing a wave of embarrassment and confusion. The man's skin beneath her hands was unexpectedly warm, which only added to her embarrassment. Rose's reaction was immediate and instinctive. She screamed. This cry was an expression of all her feelings: shock at the unexpected touch, confusion at the strangeness of what was happening, and a dire need for protection and understanding in this strange and mysterious world she had so suddenly been thrown into. After the wave of emotion had subsided a little and Rose had managed to pull herself together, the man, the embodiment of stoicism and mystery, made the decision to finally get dressed. At that moment, he seemed to come to the realization that it was really Rose standing before him, and not Agnes, the name he had mistakenly used earlier. The words he uttered about Rosa hinted at some flaw or lack of something important in her appearance or essence, which caused Rosa to put on clothes that matched her inner sense of propriety and self-respect. Determined to help Rosa in her quest to regain her lost comfort, the man announced that he would call someone who could provide the necessary assistance. His voice, resounding with authority and confidence, cut through the silence, and as if by magic, a horde of maids flocked to him in response to his call. These women, gathered around like bees around their uterus, were ready to fulfill any request, any instruction that might come from their master. In the depths of her thoughts, Rosa found herself absorbed in thoughts of the mysterious Agnes, the woman whose role she seemed to have inexplicably assumed. Who was she, this invisible presence in their lives, and what was the connection between her and the man Rosa found herself sharing a bed with upon waking? These questions were not easy because they concerned not only personalities, but also the delicate threads of human relationships intertwined between past and present. In the midst of all this thinking, Rosa made a decision. The man had to leave the room. Her request was not a whim or caprice, but rather a desire for privacy to better understand the situation. The man noted that Agnes also often asked him to do so, adding that he enjoyed watching her when she changed her clothes. When Rose, perhaps feeling embarrassed and bewildered, dropped that his behavior could be seen as perverse, the man made no attempt to justify himself or back down. On the contrary, he openly acknowledged his feelings for Agnes, stating that his actions were motivated not by mere physical attraction, but by a deep affection and love for her. These words added complexity to the already tangled story of their relationship, leaving Rosa with even more questions about the nature of the bond between this man and Agnes, as well as how she herself fits into this mosaic puzzle of human emotions and relationships. Rosa's heart was filled with compassion for the man who remained ignorant of the fate of his beloved Agnes, whose whereabouts remained a mystery, shrouded in the darkness of the unknown. Empathy for his situation was mixed with anxiety for her own safety. For deep down, Rosa feared that the moment she fully realized that she was not the object of his affection, Agnes, his reaction might be unpredictable. The possibility of encountering his anger or disappointment seemed very real to her, for the threads of fate had intertwined their lives so closely and unexpectedly. When the man finally made a move to leave, it was a moment of relief for Rosa and a new challenge at the same time. Left to her own devices, she came face to face with another manifestation of his care. He allowed the maids to help her change her clothes. The gesture, though seemingly casual, reflected a deep concern and respect for her, despite all the strangeness that shrouded their meeting. Rosa could not get rid of the feeling of embarrassment, because despite all her inner worries and doubts about their relationship, the man continued to care for her. It was more than a mere courtesy or obligation. It was a display of true nobility of soul, an ability to care for another even when the situation seemed confusing and incomprehensible. Having finished the process of changing clothes, Rosa found the strength and determination for further dialogue. She approached the man, who was at that moment enjoying the morning tea tradition. Tea was delivered to the room, and its aroma instantly filled the space, bringing in notes of exoticism and coziness. The man, with lightness in his voice, shared with Rose Agnes's newfound preference for this tea, which was the reason for his choice for this morning. Even without words, however, it was obvious that the man's own taste preferences lay far beyond this type of tea. His grimace and disgruntled look at the cup betrayed his true feelings. Rose, noticing his undisguised distaste for the drink, showed the care and attention to detail that was so valued in their home. She asked the maid to bring the man the tea he was accustomed to and usually drank. The man, whose gait and gaze radiated determination, performed an action that at first glance seemed innocent, but in reality was loaded with deep meaning. He declared without hesitation that the tea served today was no match for him or Rose, and with those words he poured it into the flower, revitalizing the plant with the unexpected drink. His next words sounded like a promise to choose the best tea for Rose, the lady who sat opposite, surrounded by an aura of mystery and subtle elegance. The maid who witnessed the act hastened to contribute her 5 cents, notifying the strict instructions of Lady Agnes, who had vetoed any tea except that which had been so unappreciated and mercilessly poured out. The man, without wasting a second, reacted instantly, ordering the drink that Agnes had been drinking before that fatal tea to be brought. His determination and confidence in his actions were unmistakable, and the maid, realizing that objections were pointless, stepped back to do his bidding. As soon as the door closed behind her, the room was silent. The man and Rose, left alone, exchanged glances in which one could read a hint of understanding born of this small but significant act of defiance. They made themselves comfortable, preparing to enjoy the tea party, which now promised to turn into a true sacrament that united them at this moment in time, separating them from the rest of the world. Rose apologized for her behavior this morning, as if her apology was a soft tissue meant to heal the invisible wound between them. Her voice, filled with warmth and tenderness, broke the veil of silence that had settled in the room. After a brief but painful silence, Rosa introduced herself, adding a note of curiosity to her words when she asked the name of the man across the table. This gesture, so simple yet full of meaning, struck him to the core. The man, as if to open the door to a new, uncharted world, introduced himself as Lukvarel Shen Lauridsen, emperor of the lands they both shared power and destiny. His voice sounded powerful and confident, each word carrying the weight of imperial dignity and unyielding willpower. In that moment, he wasn't just saying his name. He was revealing his true nature to Rose, giving her the key to understanding the depth of his being. When he called Rose Agnes Prin Alcides, his words froze in the air like gems taking in light and reflecting it with a multitude of sparks. Lady Agnes, whose name resounded in the ears of the Empire's subjects with special awe and respect, known to all as the unfailing favorite concubine of Emperor Lukwarel himself, held a unique position in the hierarchy of palace intrigue and romantic liaisons. Her privileged position was the subject of envy, gossip, but also admiration among the aristocracy and common people. Lukwarel, against all traditions and expectations, remained faithful to Agnes even in his marriage to the Empress, demonstrating his unwavering devotion and the deep feelings he harbored for her. There were many opinions about Lady Agnes among nobles and commoners alike. Some considered her a skillful seductress, skillfully using her charms to strengthen her position on the imperial throne. Others saw in her not only beauty, but also intelligence, noting her ability to maneuver easily through the labyrinth of palace politics and social relations. Her intelligence and appearance, combined with her proximity to the emperor, made Agnes not only an object of envy, but also of respect. Agnes Prin Alcides was not just another figure in the shadow of power. She was a woman who was always in the foreground, under the public gaze, always one step away from the incredible power that the emperor personified. Agnes embodied not only a symbol of love and devotion, but also of the influence that one woman can have in a world dominated by men and their ambitions. In an atmosphere filled with the aromas of exotic teas and the subtle glitter of palace jewelry, Rose once again tried to convey her true identity to Lukwarel, desperately trying to convince him that she was not Lady Agnes. With anxiety in her voice, she explained that she herself was at a loss as to how her paths had crossed the majestic walls of his palace, emphasizing her complete ignorance as to how she had ended up here. Her words were sincere, filled with confusion and a touch of fear of the misunderstanding the emperor might have. Lukwarel, who had not only power but also insight, had already begun to see behind the mask of resemblance to Agnes another personality hidden in Rosa. He realized that this was not the woman for whom he had deep feelings, despite the striking resemblance. The fear of being accused of impersonation, or even of kidnapping Lady Agnes herself, began to overwhelm Rose. She felt the weight of a situation in which she was not of her own free will. Lukwarel could not ignore the need for hard evidence. His voice was demanding when he pointed out that he found Rosa's assertions unconvincing without supporting evidence. His words carried both a hint of doubt and a desire to know the truth, which made Rose feel anxious and worried about the possible repercussions of her unexpected appearance in the Emperor's life. The moment Rosa realized that she would not be able to get away with it, the atmosphere in the room became even more tense. Lukwarel, whose walk was full of determination and confidence, shared his memories of the previous night, of how before waking up next to Rose, he had spent the night with Agnes. He described how he and Agnes, consumed by passion, indulged in lovemaking and then, wrapped in each other's arms, fell asleep. Lukwarel stated confidently that if there had been a substitution of Agnes for Rosa, he would have noticed it immediately, for no one could have so easily torn Agnes from his arms. He further expressed his bewilderment and frustration at Rosa's attempt to convince him otherwise, stating that her saying that she was not Agnes sounded to his ears like a clear insult. Lukwarel emphasized that such statements not only cast a shadow on his own person, but are a blatant insult to the emperor, whose majesty and authority do not allow such recklessness. There was a note of indignation in his voice, and his words were full of seriousness, emphasizing the depth of resentment and irritation caused by Rose's actions. Rose, feeling the growing gravity of the situation and realizing that her every word might be decisive, swore with a deep sense of responsibility before Luquerel that on no account did she wish to hurt or offend him. She recognized that their current situation seemed unimaginably absurd through the prism of common sense, but the reality was that Agnes had indeed disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a blanket of secrets and questions. Rose emphasized that no matter how strange or implausible her words may have sounded, it was she, Rose, who was in front of Luquerel, the lord and protector of the empire. At that moment, she became not just a character in their two's story, but a key witness, and, in fact, living proof of the events unfolding before the emperor's eyes. Rosa, trying to keep calm and dignity, turned to Luquerel with the hope that he could penetrate the seriousness of the moment and realize the depth of what was happening. Luquerel, gazing at Rose, noted with a certain amount of respect that her capacity for eloquence was not inferior to Agnes's. This comparison, even though it seemed like a compliment, only added fuel to the already emotionally overflowing circumstances. Rosa, whose state of mind could be described as slightly furious, as accusations and misunderstandings had pushed her to the limit, decided it was time to reveal her cards and share her story in order to shed light on the current situation. She began with the earliest and most tragic pages of her life when she lost her parents at the young age of 15. This twist of fate tested her, forcing her to face the harsh realities of life early on. Despite her loss and the bitterness of her loss, Rosa found the strength not only to go on with her life, but also to pursue knowledge. She went to school, where, through sheer perseverance and talent, she was able to secure a scholarship, which was not just an achievement, but a salvation. Having gone from student to teacher, Rosa became a tutor, which not only allowed her to earn a living, but also to impart knowledge to others, thus continuing the chain of education and inspiration. And so, leaping over years of struggle and self-assertion, Rose finds herself in a most unusual and unpredictable place, in Luquerel's bed. Rose was adamant that the transfer to the palace had taken place in her own body, adding another level of absurdity and improbability to an already confusing story. Her story was not just a biography, it was a recognition, a proof of her identity and the uniqueness of the path that, strangely enough, had led her to this decisive moment in the face of Luquerel. At this point in the story, when Rose, filled with confidence that her words and life story had convinced Luquerel of her identity and the truth of her words, there was an unexpected twist. Luquerel began to tell Agnes's story, which, to Rosa's surprise, turned out to be almost a mirror image of her own life, even with the same date of birth. With every word, with every twist of fate for Agnes, Rosa felt the reality around her begin to slowly blur, creating a sense of incredible duality between her own existence and Agnes's. Particularly striking was the discovery that the aspiration for higher light, which had been so vividly manifested in Agnes at the age of 23, was exactly the same age that Rosa now had. This coincidence went beyond the mere similarity of life paths. It seemed as if fate was playing an intricate game with them, blurring the boundaries between personalities and their worlds. But the most striking and undeniable proof of their incredible resemblance was the mole on her ankle that Luquerel was so fond of kissing. In emphasizing these striking parallels, Laquerel did not simply recount Agnes's biography. It was as if he were unfolding a mirror in front of Rosa in which she could see not only Agnes's reflection, but also a profound reflection of herself. This moment was the culmination of their meeting, a bridge between two worlds, two destinies that for a moment merged into one, calling into question everything that Rosa believed to be undeniably true about herself and the world around her. The moment Luquerel's words reached Rosa's ears, a blush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. She objected with perplexity and slight embarrassment, claiming that the notion of her as his mistress seemed absurd to her. Luquerel, for his part, did not argue, but emphasized that there were indeed considerable differences between Rosa and his Agnes, which he could not fail to notice. He remembered how Agnes had always followed the strict rules of etiquette, displayed impeccable manners, and was able to hide her true feelings behind a mask of impenetrability. Her constant striving for excellence in everything put her on a special pedestal. At the same time, Rose appeared before him in a completely different light. She was like an open book whose emotions were easily read on her face, and her directness and openness only added to her charm. This contrast in characters made Luquerel pause for thought, plunging him into speculation about Agnes's whereabouts. Where could she be at this moment? Luquerel, with a note of doubt in his voice, expressed the idea that he could not entirely exclude the possibility that Rosa had something to do with Agnes's disappearance. This assumption made Rose think, after which she logically observed that if she had indeed been complicit in the kidnapping, the more sensible course of action would have been for her to pose as Agnes, given their striking resemblance. Luquerel, not without respect for her acumen, recognized the justice of her words. However, he also emphasized that even acknowledging this fact does not remove the overall danger that still hangs in the air. The world they inhabited was full of mysteries and unknown threats, and no one was safe from the dark forces seeking to find and exploit Agnes for their own selfish purposes. Luquerel recognized that he could not afford to make Agnes's disappearance public, as it could lead to unwanted attention and possibly a threat to her. Thus, he offered Rosa a temporary role of pretending to be his concubine. This disguise was to serve a double purpose. Firstly, to protect Rosa from any suspicion, and secondly, to give Luquerel the necessary time to search for Agnes without any eyes and ears scrutinizing their every move. This move, although fraught with its risks and a certain degree of theatricality, was the only acceptable solution to the situation. After all, in a world where the rules of the game are determined by secrets and conspiracies, sometimes the surest defense is an artfully created illusion. Feeling a wave of embarrassment and indecision, Rosa voiced her hesitation, admitting that it would be extremely difficult for her to get into the role of Agnes. Luquerel, however, with unwavering confidence and a slight tinge of peremptoriness in his voice, made it clear that there was no alternative for Rose. There was a sense of determination in that statement, but also an underlying concern for her well-being in the difficult circumstances they were both involved in. Rose, immersed in her meditations, searched for a possible way to free herself from the burden hanging over her. However, after a brief reflection, she realized that there was nothing left for her to do but accept the challenge and try her best to adapt to her new role. With this decision, she expressed her consent, to which Laquerel might have sought in her eyes that spark of charm which he said Agnes so abundantly possessed. Rosa then, in an attempt to better understand her new role, asked Luquerel to share more information about Agnes, her character, her manners, how she held herself in public, and how she used her charm to achieve her goals. This request was not only an attempt to gather information for a more convincing reincarnation, but also a desire to establish a deeper understanding between Rosa and Luquerel, for to successfully complete the mission they would both have to work in close symbiosis, trusting each other and sharing a common goal. The moment Luquerel reduced the distance between himself and Rose to a minimum, his voice sounded confident, yet playful. He promised to reveal Agnes's secrets only after he gets a morning kiss. His body took a high position over Rose, creating a sense of overwhelming closeness that would have discouraged anyone. Rose, finding herself in an unexpectedly difficult situation, did not lose her presence of mind. Her reaction was instantaneous and instinctive. Embarrassment mixed with determination prevented her from giving in to a momentary impulse. She pulled away gently but firmly, bringing a note of rationality to the conversation. Rose reminded Luquerel that Agnes would hardly approve of such actions on the part of her companion, especially with another woman. Her words carried not only a reminder of loyalty and devotion, but also a subtle hint of the difficulties that would arise if Agnes returned and found out what had happened. As the warm rays of the sun caressed the neighborhood, Luquerel, whose eyes were filled with hope and longing, could not conceal a smile as he spoke of his overwhelming need to find Agnes. His words were full of determination and at the same time despair, for he felt that without her, his life was meaningless. With every word he uttered, it was clear that Luquerel felt not only love, but also a great need for Agnes to be with him, without whom his existence seemed incomplete. He realized that time was playing against them, and every second counted. However, despite the urgency of the situation, he found the strength to remain optimistic. He even outlined a plan in case Rose, forced to pretend to be Agnes for a while, didn't handle the role perfectly. Luquerel emphasized that minor flaws in her performance would not matter, because the main thing is to keep the image of Agnes in front of others. He offered Rosa a behavioral strategy, advising her to answer one-word answers or to postpone answers until later to avoid suspicion and unnecessary questions. Luquerel also touched on the important aspect of Agnes's lack of a personal maid, which made her habits and daily life a mystery to outsiders. This added to Rosa's room for maneuver. That day, as events were unfolding with extraordinary speed, Rose, realizing the importance of keeping her ordinary life a secret from prying eyes, made a request to Luquerel. Her words were full of seriousness when she asked for a letter to be sent to her work to explain her sudden absence and avoid unnecessary questions from those who were used to seeing her as a tutor. Luquerel, realizing the necessity of this step, responded to her request with a gesture of tenderness, a kiss on the forehead that was a sign of his support and agreement. He then walked away, leaving Rose alone with her thoughts and slight embarrassment at the attention he had shown her. Left alone, Rosa felt the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders and began to plan for the future, trying to anticipate every possible move. One of her first acts was to summon a maid, which was a necessary step to maintain Agnes's image. Rosa was faced with a dilemma. She was completely unaware of exactly how Agnes treated her servants, which left her with a choice of how to behave so as not to arouse suspicion. After a brief thought, she decided to act succinctly and sternly, ordering her to draw herself a bath. The moment was full of suspense, for every word and gesture might give Rosa away as a stranger in this house, but her resolve did not waver. She endeavored to reproduce the image of Agnes as convincingly as she could, starting with the smallest details of daily life. After the maid had done her bidding and the bath was drawn, Rosa asked to be left alone with her thoughts. The water was the perfect temperature, gently enveloping her body, creating the feeling of safety and comfort she had been so desperately seeking lately. This rare moment of peace gave her a chance to think deeply about the situation she found herself in. She couldn't get rid of the thought of how unexpected and strange she had found herself in Luquerel's bed, pondering all possible explanations for this paradox. Could this have been the result of an incredible body swap with Agnes? Or was it a sophisticated strategy by Agnes herself to escape from the palace, planned with incredible ingenuity and audacity? Reflecting on this, Rosa could not help but wonder about Agnes's motives. What could have motivated her to take such a drastic step as escaping from the palace, which for many would seem like a dream come true? This mystery made Rosa look at the situation from different angles, trying to understand and feel the reasons that could make someone give up a life of luxury and security in favor of the unknown and potential dangers of the outside world. As the water cooled, Rosa's thoughts continued to swirl around one mysterious figure, the Empress. She began to suspect that it was the Empress who might have been behind Agnes's disappearance, perhaps out of jealousy or a desire to attract the attention of Luquerel that had previously been given to Agnes. This thought seemed more and more convincing, but it did not bring Rose any closer to answering the main question. How had she herself ended up in Luquerel's bed? Thinking about the possible involvement of the Empress in the events added more intrigue to the mystery, but did not shed light on the very essence of what had happened. Realizing that solving this mystery could be pivotal, Rosa decided that she needed to put her best efforts into solving it. This quest has become not just an attempt for her to understand what is going on, but a test she must pass. As she stepped out of the tub, she felt her body react to the coolness of the room's air. On the one hand, it was refreshing after the stuffy steam. On the other, it reminded her to rest. After 2 hours in the bath, a luxury to which Agnes was apparently accustomed, Rosa felt fatigue envelop her body. The long immersion in the warm water had drained her strength, reminding her that even the most pleasant treatments need to be tempered. It seems that after such long water procedures, Agnes was resting, and Rosa decided to follow her example. The feeling of fatigue was a reminder to her that sometimes the most intricate issues require stepping back and giving herself a chance to recuperate. It was in this way, rushing to rest, that Rose hoped to find new strength for the challenges and clues that lay ahead. Like a whirlwind, a maid burst into the room, her face anxious as if she were carrying news of an approaching storm. She interrupted the silence with the words that a certain Dmitri had shown up unexpectedly on their doorstep, long before the agreed time. Rose, whose heart suddenly beat in an anxious rhythm, felt fear envelop her consciousness. The prospect of encountering such a surprise made her excited, for every second heralded the impending ordeal. Nevertheless, she gathered her will into a fist, deciding that it would be best to meet this man face to face to resolve the issues that had accumulated. Realizing that time was playing against her, Rosa asked the maid to help her get ready for the meeting. With every movement, with every choice of outfit, she tried to suppress the excitement and nervousness that were mercilessly trying to overpower her. As she dressed, Rosa felt the weight of the upcoming deception on her shoulders. She was to pretend to be Agnes, a woman whose life was filled with luxury and sophistication, so far removed from the humble reality in which Rose had spent her last years. This masquerade act where she had to take on a role to play someone else's life was a new challenge for her. Never before had Rosa surrounded herself with such splendor, nor had she imagined that she would be able to feel the weight and lightness of such an existence at the same time. In the great empire, where history and tradition are woven into a powerful pattern of social structure, there were 4 noble estates, each of which had its own special place in the hierarchy of power. At the very top of the social ladder were the Prin and the Azitas, 2 upper classes whose members enjoyed unquestioned respect and influence. However, the fate of the Azitas was sadly ended. For a sinister plot and attempted treason, this estate was ruthlessly exterminated, leaving behind only a shadow in the history of the empire. In addition to these aristocratic peaks, 2 lower classes, the Daran and Leos, lurked in the shadows of grandeur and power. These estates, though an integral part of the nobility, rarely ever drew attention to themselves, remaining in the shadows of their majestic counterparts. In such a world, where each rung of the social ladder has its own purpose and status, Agnes occupied a unique and special position, becoming the first official concubine in the history of the empire. Her status was not just recognition, it was the embodiment of power and privilege, giving her a special role in the social hierarchy. In this complex and multifaceted world, Rosa was to meet Dmitri, a man she knew nothing about, while maintaining Agnes's identity. This assignment was no simple test. Rosa not only had to convincingly embody the image of a concubine, but also navigate a world where every word and gesture could be interpreted as a sign. The meeting with Dmitri promised to be a key moment in her life, a test of her mind, character, and ability to convincingly inhabit another's role, while the fates of 2 estates, historically exalted and brutally destroyed, invisibly intertwined in her destiny. When the moment of the meeting arrived, Dmitri, with a glint of anticipation in his eyes, approached Rosa with a message that could change the fates of many. He heralded that funds for the shelter had been raised ahead of schedule. This was made possible by the untiring support and influence of Agnes, whose name Rosa had to assume for a time. Dmitri noted with admiration that 10 months ago they could not even dream that the shelter project would see the light of day. But now, thanks to the efforts and generosity of Agnes, not only the necessary funds had been raised, but also a building had been purchased and renovations were already underway. Handing the progress report to Rosa, Dmitri emphasized that every page of it was a testament not just to the building of the institution, but to the renewal of hope for those who needed it. This report was tangible proof of how inspiration and determination can transform a dream into reality, how one person, or rather the name behind which Rosa had to hide, can make an invaluable contribution to the good of society. Rose, holding the report in her hands, felt the weight of responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. Before her inner gaze were pages filled with numbers and plans, each one a step toward a new life for many. In that moment, she realized that she was playing the role of not just a concubine of the empire, but a person capable of influencing destinies and changing the world for the better. Under the guise of Agnes, Rosa became part of something grand, the actions of which extended far beyond personal ambitions and desires. Dimitri's gaze sparkled as he added, as if in passing, that Duke Fran would also be thrilled with the news of the orphanage. The mention caught Rose off guard, leaving her hesitant as to how to properly respond to such words. In an attempt to maintain a sympathetic atmosphere, she chose the safest route. She simply expressed her gratitude to Dimitri for his efforts and support. After that, Dimitri seemed about to leave, already turning toward the door, leaving behind the papers on the table. At the last moment, however, he stopped and, turning back, asked an unexpected question that threw Rosa into confusion again. With interest and a slight curiosity in his voice, he asked about the hairpin that Agnes had given to his daughter Laura. His interest in the workshop where this piece of jewelry was created was so genuine that Rose had to pause for a moment, trying to think of a response. This moment was a challenge for her because she had to maintain the image of Agnes without being fully informed about all aspects of her life and activities. The question about the hairpin was not just an attempt to talk about a beautiful accessory. It carried the depth of the relationship between Agnes and Dimitri's family, touching the thin threads of understanding, trust, and gratitude that bound them together. For Rose, every word, every look or gesture of Dimitri became a test of the strength of her role, forcing her to find a balance between keeping the secret and the desire not to destroy the newly established relationship. A storm of emotion raged in Rosa's heart. She did her best to keep her face calm and unruffled, for much depended on it. Through the thick fabric of secrets with which her soul was wrapped, there was fear of being exposed. Rosa's answer was short and succinct. She can't talk about the workshop because she visits it in secret. An anxiety crept into her heart that Dimitri might discover her secret and find out that she was not really Agnes. Dimitri's reaction, however, was unexpected. A light laugh cut through the air, dispelling the heavy clouds of fear and doubt. Dimitri mistakenly assumed that Rosa simply feared that if the secret of the workshop became known, Agnes would not be able to secretly order gifts for her loved ones. His misunderstanding of the situation led to him mistaking her fear for a simple concern for surprises for loved ones. This moment was a moment of brief relief for Rosa, for her secret remained undiscovered. Dimitri apologized for the misunderstanding and decided to leave her alone, getting ready to leave. But in the back of her mind, she realized that each such meeting and each such conversation made her position more and more precarious. With every word she had to say to hide the truth, Rosa became more and more entangled in the net of her own lies and secrets. The moment Dimitri turned around to leave, Rosa felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together in her head. She realized that Dimitri, despite his humble origins, occupying a position much lower on the social ladder than Agnes, must have had a special relationship with her. Perhaps a bond of trust had developed between them, perhaps even a friendship. Rose suggested that Agnes might have been the type of aristocrat who, out of pleasure, gives gifts to her lower-class friends and acquaintances, such as a hairpin for Dimitri's daughter. However, Dimitri's behavior remained a mystery to Rosa. His strange behavior could conceal something more than just a concern for the secrecy of the workshop or a misunderstanding of the situation. Perhaps there was some deeper intrigue or knowledge behind his words and actions that could be the key to unraveling a larger mosaic. Rosa realized that she needed to find out more, not only about Dimitri, but also about Duke Fran, a figure who might have played an important role in the current events. The questions that arose demanded answers, and Rosa realized that to get them, she would have to show not only wit and ingenuity, but also be prepared for further tests. At this moment, standing on the threshold of unexplored mysteries and riddles, Rosa gathered her will into a fist. She knew that there was a difficult path to be traveled in search of the truth, where each step could both bring her closer to the solution and deeper into the labyrinth of intrigue and secrets. But determination and the desire to know the truth gave her the strength to go forward through all the obstacles and uncertainties that might come her way. When the silence of the study was suddenly broken, Rose turned around and saw the maid in front of her, whose expression reflected genuine concern. The maid was apparently alarmed that Rose had spent more time in the study than expected. At that moment, catching a note of reproach in her words, Rosa suggested, perhaps ironically, that Agnes probably had a lazy disposition, which could explain her staying in the study for a long time for no apparent reason. But the maid's reaction was immediate and unexpected. With deep sincerity and apparent consternation in her voice, she hastened to refute Rose's assumption. She stated that in her mind there was no person more diligent and hardworking than Agnes. Her words sounded like she was talking about someone she'd known for years, seen in many different situations, and could always rely on his tenacity and ability to work. The maid mentioned that Agnes had been dozing a lot lately, as if suffering from narcolepsy, a condition in which a person can suddenly fall asleep at any moment, regardless of the circumstances. In an atmosphere of puzzled alarm, the maid turned to Rose with a serious expression, expressing her fears about her health. She strongly recommended seeing a doctor because she was alarmed at the way Rose's condition had been changing recently. Rose, flustered by these words, asked for clarification as to what signs had caused the maid's concern. She did not hesitate to enumerate. During the last 2 months, Agnes had spent more time in the arms of sleep than ever before. Her appetite had noticeably decreased, and she even began to fall asleep at public events, something that had been unusual for her before. The maid also confessed that the only reason she had not shared her observations with Lucarel was because of an explicit order from Agnes. This conversation was a wake-up call for Rosa. She realized that her attempts to hide her true state behind the mask of Agnes were not as successful as she had thought. The importance of being more convincing in her role had become apparent, and now Rosa knew she had to try doubly hard to make sure no one suspected a switch. Deep in thought, Rosa couldn't help thinking that there might be a disease behind Agnes's mystical disappearance. Thanking the maid for her vigilance and care, Rosa searched for answers not only about her own health, but also about the reasons that might have led to such a dramatic change in Agnes's life. The maid, however, smiled modestly in response to the words of gratitude and waved them away, as if her concern was only a fraction of what Agnes had done for her family. She reminded Rosa of Agnes's meaningful gesture, which was that Agnes had paid for her brother's expensive medical treatment out of her personal funds. Thanks to this selfless act and the medication, the cost of which was impressive, the maid's brother was now feeling great. This conversation added new colors to the picture of the relationship between Rose and the maid, and also emphasized the depth of kindness and generosity that Agnes possessed. Rosa realized that concern for the welfare of others was at the heart of how Agnes led her life, and this understanding only strengthened her resolve to be a worthy substitute, continuing Agnes's deeds and upholding her legacy of good deeds. Under the influence of deep reflection and newfound knowledge of Agnes's actions, Rosa made a firm promise to take more careful care of her health. Maid Emily is no longer just a maid, but a person with a name and her own history of interaction with Agnes. After realizing how meaningful and kind Agnes was, Rosa began to reflect on how many people could have been touched by Agnes's generosity through her good deeds. This realization broadened her view of the world in which Agnes lived, and awakened Rosa's desire to learn more about those Agnes might have supported and the traces she had left in other people's lives. Also, this conversation made Rosa think about the dark side of human relationships, the possibility of Agnes having enemies. In view of all the kindness and generosity with which it was done, the question arose, could Agnes have been the object of envy or ill will? Rosa began to wonder whether Agnes's disappearance was the result of someone else's malicious intent, rather than just a random event or Agnes's own choice. These thoughts filled her heart with anxiety and determination at the same time, to find out what had really happened to Agnes, and whether there was a hidden threat that Rosa had yet to discover. So, step by step, Rosa delved deeper and deeper into the mysteries of Agnes's past life, trying to unravel the tangle of circumstances that led to her disappearance. In this search for the truth, Rose realized that each new piece of information only added questions to the existing ones, making her journey even more confusing and intriguing. After a thought-packed day, Rosa decided it was time to get some rest and collect her thoughts. She felt that she had a difficult task ahead of her, a meeting with Lucarel, during which she would have to ask him many questions concerning not only Agnes's disappearance, but also many other mysteries that were beginning to unravel slowly in her mind. Rose had barely settled down to get comfortable when suddenly, her peaceful rest was broken by an unexpected greeting. This sudden sound made her heart quicken with surprise. She stirred and began to look around for the source. As her gaze slid around the room, she found that she was not alone. Next to her, very close, was Luquerel, whose eyes were fixed on Rose with a languid yet expectant expression. His presence was so unexpected that Rose could feel her heart skip a beat. Luquerel didn't just seem to come to her unnoticed. He seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if he were part of the shadows gently enveloping the room. In the shadow of mysterious circumstances, Rose, with a slight tremor in her voice, appealed to Luquerel not to put her in fear. Luquerel, whose heart was wrapped in the slender hope of meeting Agnes before him, approached Rosa slowly, as if overcoming an inner resistance. His eyes flashed with longing for the past, when he and Agnes had been inseparable. With this nostalgia in his heart, he turned to Rosa with a question filled with a soft hope, not concealing a desire to return to the past when Agnes was near. His words sounded almost like a prayer, a wish to regain the happiness he had lost, but with Agnes. Rose, who was in the epicenter of the unexpected attention, felt embarrassed. Her reaction to the recurring question of whether she was Agnes was filled with mild irritation and fatigue from the endless repetition of the same question. Luquerel, whose thoughts were full of determination, expressed his conviction that it was necessary to discover conclusive evidence that Agnes had really left the confines of the palace. It was like the beginning of a complex investigation where every stone must be turned over to uncover the truth. Rosa, for her part, offered an alternative theory, suggesting that Agnes could still be inside the palace, perhaps hiding from everyone. Her words added mystery to an already confusing story. Rosa also expressed fears that Agnes might have been injured in the process of her disappearance or secrecy. This suggestion filled the air with even greater anxiety about the fate of the missing person. But Luquerel, in spite of all these conjectures and misgivings, remained unshaken in his faith in Agnes's safety. His logic was ironclad. If someone really wanted to use Agnes as a means to influence him, it would be in their interest to keep her safe and sound. This confidence not only emphasized his strategic thinking, but also revealed the depth of his feelings for Agnes, showing that he was willing to consider any scenario as long as she remained safe. This was a key point in their quest, leading to the need for a deep understanding of the palace's internal intrigues and possible motives behind Agnes's disappearance. In the midst of their conversation, Luquerel, with a note of genuine interest in his voice, asked Rosa if she had learned anything new and useful in her quest. Rosa wasted no time in sharing the latest news of her meeting with Dimitri, during which she learned of a certain Duke Fran. This fragment of conversation emphasized their mutual desire to solve the mystery of Agnes's disappearance, adding new details to the mosaic of their investigation. Luquerel, for his part, provided his analysis of the characters mentioned. He characterized Dimitri as a highly calculating businessman whose reputation as a model family man was widely known in their circles. These words revealed Luquerel's deep understanding of the personalities playing key roles in their society and emphasized the importance of each in the context of their research. When it came to Sullivan Prince Fran, the description became even more vivid, comparable to his personality. Luquerel described him as a real handsome and wealthy enviable bachelor, possessing not only looks, but also the ability to manage his reputation with incredible sophistication. This characterization of Fran illuminated him as a man capable of keeping secrets and manipulating public opinion, making him a very significant figure in their cause. Despite the detailed descriptions, however, Luquerel acknowledged the difficulty in saying anything specific about Fran's connection to their investigation. Discussing the charitable organizations behind figures such as Dimitri and Sullivan opened up a new layer of research possibilities. According to Luquerel, the depth of their involvement with the charity may have hidden key clues that require more detailed examination. This suggestion emphasized not only their joint efforts to find the truth, but also their desire for a deep understanding of the motives of those who may have been involved in the disappearance. However, Rosa expressed concern about her ability to continue the deception, fearing that her true identity might be revealed if she continued to host guests under the guise of Agnes. This moment reflected the complexity of their scheme and Rose's internal conflict, feeling the pressure to maintain the facade necessary for their investigation. Luquerel, after offering a solution, mentioned the existence of an archive in the library storing guest data that could prove invaluable to their cause. However, he also emphasized that any attempts by Agnes to get into these records would arouse suspicion, emphasizing the need for Rosa to act skillfully and carefully so as not to draw unnecessary attention to her actions. In addition, Luquerel emphasized the need for Rosa to hone her manners to better fit the role of Agnes. This advice not only reflected their desire for flawlessness in the details of their plan, but also emphasized the importance of external attributes in the game of external impressions that was integral to their strategy. In their journey to unravel, every step, every word, and every gesture mattered, leading them through thorns to the stars of truth. At that moment, when the air was saturated with the expectation and excitement of the coming event, Luquerel, with a promise that sounded like music to the ears, promised Rosa to reveal to her all the secrets of the aristocracy and to give a ball at which she would accompany him, taking the place of Agnes. The suggestion made Rosa's heart beat faster, and her mind whirled with thoughts of possible consequences. She couldn't help but feel anxious. This kind of attention was bound to cause someone to realize she wasn't who she said she was. This fear of Rosa's was not unfounded, for the masquerade in which she participated was an extremely dangerous ordeal. Luquerel, noticing her excitement, asked with concern in his voice if she could dance, in an effort to ease her anxiety for the upcoming test. Rosa nodded in response, a little calmer, confirming her skills. He confidently declared that nothing disturbed him now, as if there were no barriers or obstacles in his world, only endless possibilities. Rose, however, listening to him, could not share his serenity. She began to think that Luquerel might be too careless about the situation, not realizing the full extent of the possible risks and consequences. Her view of the world was different, more cautious and measured, unlike his carefree optimism. This difference in perception of their situation created a certain distance between them, making Rose wonder about the depth of Luquerel's understanding of what they had both gotten themselves into and the possible consequences of their venture. As a sign of care and understanding, he stroked her affectionately, as if trying to smooth and dispel her painful feelings with a light touch. Luquerel, watching Rosa, quickly noticed that the malaise was beginning to take hold of her, making her eyes tired and her movements slower. His attentive gaze couldn't help but notice the shadow of weariness glinting in her eyes, and he realized it was caused by a headache, like a heavy gray blanket shrouding her thoughts. With deep sympathy and care in his voice, Luquerel suggested that Rosa rest to relieve the burdens of the difficult day that had tested her. He realized that rest was not just desirable, but necessary to restore her strength and health. There was genuine concern in his words, backed up by action. He had already given orders to prepare tea leaves, known for their healing properties, which were supposed to bring relief to Rose. This choice was no accident. Luquerel had consulted with the imperial healer to ensure that the proposed remedy would be best for her recovery. This act of care and foresight from Luquerel not only emphasized his deep affection and attention to Rose, but also demonstrated his desire to provide her with the utmost comfort and care, even in the smallest details. Luquerel shared with Rosa a morning ritual that he treasured, and that had become a treasured tradition for him. He began each morning with a cup of tea in the company of Agnes. This habit was not just a routine, but a moment of sincere communication and a delicate start to a new day. Expressing his desire to share similar morning moments with Rosa, Luquerel hinted at his desire to involve her even more deeply in his life, giving her the same intimacy and trust he shared with Agnes. However, holding back excitement at the offer to share morning tea, Luquerel also communicated his immediate duties, which required his full attention and absence that evening. He explained that because of these circumstances, Rose would be forced to spend the night alone, without him around. Despite this temporary separation, Luquerel emphasized the importance of maintaining the illusion of their being together, which was necessary to maintain the appearance that he was still sleeping with Agnes. After voicing his intentions and upcoming plans, Luquerel, filled with concern for her well-being, left Rose to rest, emphasizing his care and attention to her well-being. The morning sun's rays gently touched Rosa's face, waking her from the deep and carefree sleep that had swept over her so suddenly and quickly in the evening that she couldn't even remember the moment when her eyes closed, plunging her into the world of dreams. When she awoke, she found that her clothes had been carefully changed into a nightgown. a careful act of the maids acting so quietly and discreetly as to prevent her from even a glimpse of their presence. This morning moment enveloped Rosa in a sense of peaceful idyll, giving her a brief respite from recent events and the challenges ahead. However, she was aware that she had an important task ahead of her, preparing for the upcoming ball, which promised to be one of the most significant events in her life. With full determination and understanding of the importance of the moment, Rosa dedicated the morning to honing her dancing skills, striving to perfect every move. She repeated pas after pas, trying to make her dance look flawless, smooth, and graceful, because it was not just a performance of dance elements, but a way to express herself and her respect for the traditions and guests of the ball. Working on her skills, Rosa was filled with confidence and grace, realizing that every step, every turn carries much more than just dance moves. They were a bridge to a new life, to new relationships, and perhaps to a new self-understanding. Her diligence and dedication to the art of dance was not only to impress the guests of the ball, but also to establish herself as a worthy escort for Lucarel, reflecting his status and position in society. In that unexpected moment when the atmosphere of the room was being filled with the lightness and grace of Rose's dance, something happened that fundamentally changed the mood of that scene. The space, previously encompassed only by the music and movements of the dancing soul, was suddenly disturbed by the appearance of an unexpected guest. Lucarel appeared in the doorway, his figure instantly attracting the eyes, particularly of Rose, who until that moment had been completely absorbed in her dance. Rose, feeling Lucarel's gaze upon her, could not conceal her embarrassment. Her movements, previously so free and easy, suddenly stopped, like the wind that dies down before a storm. She hastily covered her face as if trying to escape his gaze, but not forgetting the obligations of good manners, greeting him with a mute gesture. Lucarel, on his part, showed no sign of joy or smile at the sight of Rose. His gaze was gloomy, like a heavy cloud on the horizon that heralded an impending storm. In spite of this, he traversed the space between them and, coming up to Rose, took her hand. His actions were full of determination and intent, manifesting in the way he pressed her hand against his, creating a bond between them that seemed both unexpected and immutable. This moment, full of tension and unspoken questions, made time seem to stand still. There was a sense of something invisible and important going on between the two men. After a moment of tense silence and the inevitable attraction felt between Rose and Lucarel, they suddenly, as if yielding to an invisible call, began to move in unison, swirling in a dance. Their movements were harmonious and graceful, creating an atmosphere of magic and unique enchantment around them. The maids who had unexpectedly witnessed this performance exchanged confused glances, unable to take their eyes off this spectacle in which skill and emotion were intertwined. As the music faded and the last notes dissolved into thin air, Rosa and Lucarel, still holding hands, made a graceful bow to each other. This gesture was filled with respect and recognition of her partner's skill. At this moment, Lucarel, raising his voice, addressed the maids with orders to serve tea, thus adding a note of comfort and domestic warmth to the evening. He did not miss the opportunity to express his admiration for Rosa's dance, emphasizing its grace and technique. Rosa, for her part, modestly remarked that dance has always been her element, and she has always received high marks for her art. This exchange of compliments not only emphasized their mutual respect for both art and each other, but also added warmth to their relationship, allowing the audience to see the depth of the bond between the characters. During a cozy tea party, saturated with the aromas of fine teas, Rosa noticed with curiosity that Lucarel preferred a very different tea, not like the one she drank. Lucarel, with a slight smile, explained that the tea Rose had chosen had special properties most beneficial, specifically for girls, and so he preferred an alternative that suited his tastes and needs. Rose, catching the notes of jocularity in his words, tasted her drink with interest, and an incredible taste sensation awaited her. Tea seemed to her not just a beverage, but a whole magical potion that could awaken the mind and envelop her with a sense of grace. After the taste buds were pleasantly surprised, Rosa decided to turn the conversation to more serious topics by asking about the latest news. Luquerel, pondering every word, shared that no significant events had occurred, but he could say with certainty that Agnes remained perfectly safe. This news, though not full of dramatic twists and turns, brought a sense of calmness and confidence to Rosa's soul that everything was going as it should, and allowed her for a moment to distract herself from her daily cares, immersing herself in the atmosphere of a warm evening filled with the aromas of tea and the subtle play of emotions. With an inner calmness yet seriousness, Luquerel emphasized how important a role Rose plays in finding Agnes. His eyes, full of determination, met Rosa's as he expressed his hopes for her help. It wasn't just a request, it was an admission that without Rose, the mission might not be feasible. Luquerel emphasized that Rosa is not just a helper in this case, but a key figure in solving the mystery of Agnes's disappearance, and he deeply believes that it is through Rosa's efforts that it will be possible to show everyone that Agnes is still among them. With these words, Rosa's heart grew restless. She wondered about the future, about whether she would be able to return to her normal routine when their task was completed and Agnes had been found. Rose felt the weight of the responsibility that Luquerel had so tactfully placed upon her, and at the same time realized that their common goal was a chance at salvation and a return to a peaceful life for all those affected by these events. Overwhelmed with a mixture of feelings and fears about the future, Rosa couldn't get rid of the thought that after the successful completion of their mission to find Agnes, Luquerel might take extreme measures against her. She expressed her fears, suggesting that she was in for either a kidnapping or even something darker, but Luquerel, with unwavering confidence and sincerity in his voice, dispelled her fears. He flatly rejected this speculation, assuring Rose that his intentions were purely honorable. He promised that he would not only keep her out of harm's way, but that he would give her his full support in adjusting to her normal life after the conclusion of their common endeavor. These words, filled with care and devotion, should have soothed Rosa's troubled heart, giving her hope for a peaceful future. Seeking solitude and tranquility, or perhaps in an attempt to find answers to the questions that troubled her, Rosa expressed a desire to stroll through the imperial garden. This garden, part of the grand Luquerel family estate, was once a gift from Agnes, a symbol of love and affection. This place, where every flower and every avenue held stories of the past, seemed the perfect place to reflect and find harmony. Luquerel, realizing the importance of this place to both himself and Rose, agreed to her request. It was not just an agreement to go for a walk, but a gesture of support and understanding, a demonstration that there was a bond between them that could overcome any adversity. Thus, in the green sanctuary of the imperial garden, where every step reminded them of the beauty and majesty of nature, Rosa and Luquerel could for a moment distract themselves from their cares. For Rosa, the walk was an opportunity to look beyond current events, allowing herself to dream of a future in which fears and uncertainties would be left behind, and new horizons of opportunity and hope would open up before her. Strolling through the expanse of the luxurious garden surrounded by attentive maids, Rose felt a strange sense of familiarity to the new role she had to play. It was as if she was blending into the image of Agnes, an aristocrat whose fate is shrouded in mystery and enigma. In this exquisite masquerade, she was remarkably successful in deceiving those around her, except for one circumstance that marred her calmness. These were the unexpected and sometimes embarrassing antics of Luquerel, a man who remained a mystery to her. Amid the rustling of the leaves and the quiet conversations of her companions, Rosa's thoughts suddenly turned to the details of Agnes's disappearance. As she thought about it, she realized how difficult it had been to abduct her from such a place. The estate, magnificent in its size and architecture, was also a fortress protected by a vigilant guard. Every corner here was protected, every passageway monitored. It made Rosa wonder about the motives and abilities of whoever had dared to take such a step. She was not only concerned for Agnes's fate, but also for her own future, for the game of pretending was dangerous and required great skill and equanimity. Like a bolt of lightning, a stranger appeared in front of Rose, illuminating the space with her presence. With a slight smile on her lips, she turned to Rosa, calling her Agnes, and expressed her joy at the sudden meeting, as if there were ties of long-standing friendship between them. She questioned vigorously, genuinely interested in what had brought Agnes back to them, emphasizing her pleasure at their unexpected intersection. Rose, finding herself at a loss for such an unexpected development, inwardly struggled to maintain her composure. It was becoming clear to her that this girl was someone special to Agnes, someone she treasured and trusted. And then, as if sensing the awkwardness of the moment, the girl casually mentioned that she had heard from Lochvarl about the headaches she said Agnes suffered from. This explanation seemed to justify Rose's confusion and silence, giving her a temporary space to gather her thoughts and continue their conversation without suspicion. This moment was for Rosa a real test of the strength of her role. She realized that her every word, every gesture had to be weighed and precise in order not to destroy the fragile edifice of her pretense. In a flash, a startling truth was revealed to Rosa, like a flash of insight in a dark room. It became clear to her that she was not just an acquaintance of Agnes's, but someone much more important. This realization came to her with a peculiar force, for only one person in their close circle could call Luquerel by name without resorting to titles or formal addresses. With her heart beating in unison with her sudden panic, Rose performed a graceful bow worthy of aristocracy, addressing the Empress of the highest status and power, Scarlett Reginana Lauridsen, with the warmth and respect befitting her majesty. "I am Agnes Prynne Alcides," she introduced herself, trying to hide her excitement behind a mask of calm, and apologized for the delay in greeting, which might have seemed disrespectful to such a dignitary. In the back of her mind, Rose worried that her hesitation and uncertainty could give away her true nature, jeopardizing not only her safety, but everything she was trying to protect by playing this dangerous role. The panic that gripped Rose was not just fear of the possibility of being exposed, but a deep concern about the consequences of her actions. She realized that her every word, every gesture could have unpredictable consequences in a game at the highest levels of power, where mistakes cost far more than one could imagine. Empress Scarlet, remaining without a hint of a smile, raised her voice filled with indefinable emotion to assure Rose that there was no malice or resentment toward her. At this moment, Rose, as a sign of respect and gratitude for the generosity shown, performed another bow. The Empress continued by expressing her sincere desire to meet Agnes, which pleased Rose immensely, emphasizing that Luquerel's concern for Agnes's well-being was deep and genuine. Scarlett's words sounded kind and sincere, but Rose was overcome with anxiety and doubt as to their truth. Her heart was racing, and her mind was trying to discern whether there was some devious game or falsity behind the mask of benevolence. This moment was a test for Rosa, in which she had to not only look for support in the words of the Empress, but also to evaluate their depth, trying to understand whether these words could be trusted. Every word Scarlett said, every gesture and look became for Rose a subject of careful analysis. Outwardly, she remained calm and collected, but inside, storms of doubt and reflection raged. In this whirlwind of feelings and emotions, Rosa tried to find solid ground, to understand how sincere the Empress was and what her true intentions were. It wasn't every day that one had to face such trials, where every word can have weighty consequences and every choice can drastically change the course of events. Empress Scarlett's attention did not escape the change in Rose's complexion, which had visibly turned pale, causing her to be concerned about the girl's health. With a suggestion full of care and attention, she advised Rosa to see her personal physician to make sure there were no serious health problems. Rose, however, in deference to her status as Empress and perhaps for fear of giving herself away, declined the offer. At this critical moment, the conversation was unexpectedly interrupted by another girl, who entered the dialogue with a sharp remark about the impoliteness of the Empress's physician turning his attention to a concubine. This insertion into the discussion introduced an element of tension and emphasized the complexity of Rosa's position at the center of the dignitary spotlight. This girl's actions and words added a new layer of complexity to the already difficult situation in which Rose found herself. Not only did she have to balance keeping her true identity a secret from everyone, including the Empress, but now she had to navigate through the complex social norms and expectations inherent in her temporary status.